My stepson stole my info to buy a computer and laughed when I found out. I called the cops, canceled the delivery, and made his dad pay. His smug grin died along with his live stream. Don't forget to subscribe and share your experiences below. Let's get started. You're nothing to me, and you never will be. Those weren't the exact words Ryan used that night, but they were there, hidden inside his laugh, buried in the sneer that spread across his face when I caught him stealing from me. He didn't have to say it outright. The mockery in his eyes said it all. Ryan was 17, old enough to know better, old enough to understand what theft was, what fraud meant, what kind of damage it could do. But in his mind, it wasn't theft. In his mind, it was just another game, his game where I was always the fool who paid, and he was always the one who won. He had used my banking information. Not for food, not for clothes, not for anything that could be excused with desperation. No, he used it to order himself a brand new gaming computer. A machine worth more than my first car. A machine he knew I would never buy him no matter how much he begged. He didn't just cross a line. He erased it. I confronted him. I expected panic, maybe stammering excuses, maybe even a flicker of shame. Instead, Ryan leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, and smiled. He didn't deny it. He didn't hide. He laughed in my face, like my anger was entertainment, like my words were a bad punchline in a joke he'd already written. That laugh hit harder than the theft itself. It wasn't just money he stole. It was respect, the last fragile thread I thought might one day tie us together. Because here's the truth. I had carried that boy for years. He wasn't mine, not by blood. His real father, Mark, was the ghost in the background, drifting in and out when it suited him, throwing scraps of attention Ryan's way just to keep the fantasy alive. But it was me who showed up, me who paid the bills, me who worked overtime shifts, took on second jobs, and sacrificed weekends just so Ryan could have the things other kids his age took for granted. It was me who covered his school trips when Mark's check got lost in the mail. Me who bought the new shoes when the old ones tore apart, even though my own boots had holes in the soles. Me who paid for his sports gear, his braces, his endless subscriptions, his phone bill. Every year, thousands of dollars slipped from my hands into his world, and I told myself it was worth it. That one day he would see. That one day he would know. But Ryan didn't see. Ryan never knew. To him, I was just the man his mother married. The wallet in the corner. The fool who kept paying no matter how much contempt he threw back in return. And in that laugh, that smug, cutting laugh, I realized the truth. There was no respect here, and there never had been. I didn't shout. I didn't break down. Rage would have given him power, would have made him feel like he had won again. No, I went quiet. I sat with the cold weight of it pressing into my chest. That night, I lay in bed beside his mother, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully, oblivious. My mind churned with every sacrifice, every long shift at work, every bill I had covered for a boy who looked me in the eye and treated me like a joke. I thought of Mark, the man Ryan still idolized, the man who only appeared when it was convenient, who had never once paid the real costs of raising his own son. And I thought of myself, the one who had borne it all, invisible, disposable, unacknowledged. It was a cruel irony. The man who stayed was the man despised. The man who abandoned was the man glorified. By the time the sun began to rise, I had made my decision. I didn't make a scene. I didn't slam my fist on the table or drag Ryan out of bed to lecture him. What good would that have done? He would have smirked, shrugged, maybe thrown Mark's name in my face again, reminding me I wasn't the real dad. Instead, I acted in silence. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called the bank. I reported every unauthorized transaction. I disputed every charge. The dream machine he had ordered was stopped dead before it ever touched the delivery truck. I made sure his little empire of arrogance would crumble before his eyes. Ryan strutted around the house, cocky, convinced he had outplayed me again. He talked to his friends about the computer that was on its way, grinning as though he had already won. He didn't know the truth. He didn't realize that while he was laughing, the order was already canceled, the payment reversed, the fraud exposed. He thought he was in control. He wasn't. And in that quiet moment, I realized something more. I wasn't going to keep paying for someone who treated me like this. Not 1 cent more. I had broken my back for years, carrying a boy who spit in my face and still expected me to keep carrying him. No longer. The silence of that decision was louder than any argument. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee while Ryan scrolled through his phone, bragging to his friends, laughing, so sure of himself. He had no idea his dream was already ashes. No idea that the ground beneath him was about to vanish. And I let him laugh, because soon enough, he would understand that when you bite the hand that feeds you, eventually, that hand closes into a fist. I didn't waste time. The morning after canceling the computer, I took the next step, the step that would sever Ryan's grip on me once and for all. I went to the police. I filed a fraud report. The officer at the desk looked at me with raised eyebrows, maybe expecting me to hesitate when I explained it was my stepson who had stolen my banking information. But I didn't stutter. I didn't flinch. I told him the truth in plain words, and I signed my name on the report. My hand didn't shake. That was the moment the ties began to snap. When I left the station, I pulled out my phone and began dismantling every connection Ryan had to me. His phone line gone. I called the provider and cut it off. He wouldn't make another call or send another text on my dime. His streaming accounts, his gaming subscriptions, every convenience he took for granted, all canceled. I opened my laptop and went line by line through my bank account, shutting down payments that had bled me for years. The quiet bleed of money stopped cold. Then I sent a message that had been years overdue. I wrote to his biological father, Mark, a man who had walked out long ago, who only resurfaced when it suited him, who lived in the boy's imagination as some kind of heroic figure even though he was nothing but a coward running from responsibility. I drafted a detailed list of every expense I had covered for Ryan over the years. Line after line, the evidence stacked up: school fees, clothes, medical bills, sports gear, phones, allowances, birthdays, endless food on the table. And then, at the bottom, I added a new line in bold: attempted fraud with stolen banking info. Then I hit send. It was a reckoning. For the first time in years, Mark was going to be forced to look at the bill for the son he had abandoned. He was going to face the reality he had ignored while I broke myself to cover for him. By Monday, the cracks had already spread. Ryan sat at his desk, grinning into his camera, telling his small band of online viewers that his dream setup was on its way. He bragged about specs he'd memorized, painted pictures of streams that would make him famous, and laughed as though the world was about to hand itself to him. His friends filled the chat with excitement, teasing him, praising him, treating him like a king. But the delivery truck never came. Instead, the police did. 2 officers arrived at the door that afternoon. The moment Ryan saw them standing in the doorway, the smirk drained from his face. His laughter died in his throat. On the screen behind him, his live chat exploded. Question marks, exclamation points, frantic comments asking what was happening, why the cops were there, why Ryan suddenly looked like a boy caught with his hand in the fire. His hands shook as he pulled off his headset. His voice cracked when he tried to ask them why they were there. He looked over at me, eyes wide, searching for help. The same man he had mocked just days before, the same man he had laughed at. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let him feel the weight of what he had done. He stammered, tried to explain, but the officers weren't interested in excuses. They asked him questions he couldn't answer. They read him his rights. His world, so carefully built on lies and arrogance, collapsed around him while strangers in uniforms tore through his fantasies. It was the first time in years I saw him afraid, truly afraid, and it was only the beginning. When they escorted him out, his live stream still running in the background, the chat erupted with chaos. Some mocked him, some pitied him, some begged him to explain. But he wasn't there to answer. For once, he wasn't in control. That night, the phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was sharp, demanding, already defensive. The police had contacted him. He was the one legally responsible now. He had to drive down to the station, deal with the paperwork, pay the fine, and start the refund process. He was livid, not at Ryan, but at me, furious that I hadn't handled it privately, that I had exposed his son to the law, I almost laughed in his ear. Privately, I had carried his failures privately for years. I had buried myself in silence, paid his debts, raised his son, and all it bought me was contempt. Now he was forced to carry his own burden, and he didn't like the weight. "Welcome to fatherhood," I told him before hanging up. For the first time, Mark faced the real cost of raising his son. He couldn't disappear this time. He couldn't vanish behind excuses and late checks. He was the father in name, now he had to be the father in consequence. Ryan returned home, bitter and shaken. The arrogance had drained from him. His friends had mocked him online. His reputation was cracked. And for once, the bill had not been paid by me. It was his real father's money that kept him out of deeper trouble. The silence in the house was thick. His mother hovered, her eyes full of questions she didn't dare ask me. She had watched it all unfold, powerless. Her loyalty stretched thin between her son and her husband. She knew better than to defend Ryan's actions outright, but she said little. Too little. Always too little. And me? I felt no triumph, no joy, just a cold, clean sense of clarity. The cord had been cut. Ryan wasn't my responsibility anymore. Neither was Mark. Neither was anyone who treated my sacrifices as if they were nothing but a punchline. I had been the provider, the shield, the silent laborer behind their comfort. But that era was over. From now on, the boy who sneered at me would answer to the father he glorified. From now on, every bill, every consequence, every harsh reality would come from the man whose blood he carried, not the man he laughed at. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of his lesson. Justice doesn't arrive in a single blow. It comes slowly, grinding like gears, stripping away illusions piece by piece until all that's left is truth. Mark learned that first. He walked into the police station with the swagger of a man who thought the world owed him leniency. He argued, he cursed, he even tried to charm the officer at the desk, as though this were just a misunderstanding, a harmless teenage mistake. But the paperwork was already filed. The fine was already set. The process of refunds and investigations had already begun *n. And the officers didn't care about his excuses. They didn't care about his name. They only cared about the evidence, and the evidence pointed straight at his son. For once, Mark couldn't vanish. He couldn't shove the responsibility onto me, as he had done for years. He had to sit there, wallet in hand, signing checks he couldn't afford, watching his own son squirm beside him. His shoulders sagged under the weight of bills that had always fallen silently on me. He had wanted the title of real dad. Now he was paying the price that came with it. I wasn't there to see it, but I imagined it clearly. Mark, sweating through his shirt, his pride cracking as the clerk recited the total he owed. Ryan, pale and quiet, staring at the floor. No smirk left, no laughter. Just silence. Just shame. When they came home, the atmosphere in the house was poisoned. Ryan slammed his bedroom door, his footsteps heavy, his face flushed with a mix of fear and rage. Mark had dropped him off and left without a word. Not even a glance in my direction. It was as if the weight of what had happened had finally exposed him, and he didn't want me to see the truth. He wasn't a provider, he wasn't a father, he was a failure pretending to hold a title. The house stayed tense for days. Ryan barely came out of his room. His mother avoided my eyes, choosing instead to fuss over chores, to busy herself in silence. She wanted to smooth the cracks, to pretend this was just a bad week, that things would return to normal if we didn't speak of it. But there was no going back. The line had already been drawn, and we were living on different sides of it. And then came the knock. It was late evening when Ryan finally emerged from his self-imposed prison. His face was pale, his eyes red, as if he had spent hours staring at a screen or fighting back tears he wouldn't let anyone see. He shuffled into the living room, his shoulders hunched, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I talk to you?" I didn't move from my chair. I didn't soften my expression. "Talk." He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. For a moment he couldn't even meet my eyes. Then, with a voice that trembled against his pride, he said one word. "Sorry." It hung in the air, brittle, fragile, almost too small to hear. But it was there. I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to feel the weight of it. I wanted him to understand that a single word didn't erase years of contempt, didn't erase the theft, didn't erase the laugh that had burned itself into my memory. "What are you sorry for?" I asked finally. His eyes flickered, his voice cracked. For what I did. For everything. I studied him. For the first time, there was no smirk, no arrogance, no performance. Just a boy stripped bare, finally forced to face the man who had carried him all these years. "You admitted it then?" I pressed. "That I did more for you than your real father ever has?" His lips tightened, but he nodded. Yes. The word was quiet, but it was true. I leaned forward, my voice low, deliberate. "Do you understand why I did what I did? Why I cut you off? Why I called the police?" His eyes brimmed with something, not just fear, but realization. He nodded again. Because I treated you like nothing. And you're not nothing." For the first time, I believed he meant it. But belief didn't mean forgiveness. I shook my head slowly. "Trust breaks fast, Ryan. Faster than you think. One laugh, one betrayal, and it's gone. And once it's gone, it takes years to rebuild. Years." He winced at the word, as though the prospect of years was unbearable. He wanted absolution now, a clean slate, a return to the comfort he had lost. But life doesn't work that way. Not anymore. "From now on," I said, my voice firm, "you are responsible for your own expenses, your own choices, your own consequences. I won't shield you anymore. I won't bleed myself dry so you can spit on me and laugh. That era is finished." His mouth opened, then closed again. For once, he had no comeback, no joke. He just nodded, slowly, silently, like a boy who had been handed a sentence he didn't want but couldn't fight. When he left the room, the silence remained. His mother lingered in the hallway, her face pale, her lips pressed tight as though she wanted to say something but didn't dare. She had watched it unfold, seen her son humbled, seen her husband refuse to bend. And for once, she didn't excuse him. She didn't plead. She just stood there, quiet, as if finally realizing what her silence had cost. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the weight of it pressing down on me. Ryan had apologized. He had admitted the truth. But I knew better than to believe that one fragile moment could undo years of bitterness. This wasn't a victory. It wasn't redemption. It was just the beginning of a long, hard road. One where he would have to prove, day after day, that he had changed. But for the first time, I saw a crack in the armor. For the first time, I saw him look at me not as a joke, not as a wallet, not as a man to be mocked, but as something more. It wasn't respect yet, but it was the shadow of it. And that was enough to keep me sitting there, in the silence, waiting to see what would come next. A month passed before the next crack appeared. And when it came, it didn't come from Ryan. It came from Mark. The message arrived on my phone late at night. A simple text. No greetings, no explanations, just words stripped bare. "How did you ever afford all this? I can barely cover his internet." I stared at it for a long moment, the glow of the screen burning in the dark. There it was. The truth laid out in fewer words than it had ever taken me to explain myself. Mark had finally realized what I had known all along. Raising a son wasn't just about dropping by on birthdays with hollow gifts. It was about shouldering the crushing weight of responsibility day after day, year after year. And he couldn't do it. He never could. I didn't reply to Mark. Instead, I took a **T of his message and sent it to Ryan. Beneath it, I wrote a single sentence. "This is why I only invest in people who value it." For a while, there was no answer. I imagined him staring at the screen, his pride choking him, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, wrestling with the truth he had spent years denying. Then, finally, his reply came. "You're right. You matter more than I ever admitted." The words sat heavy in my chest. Not quite an apology, not quite absolution, but something more dangerous. Honesty. The boy who had once laughed in my face was beginning to see the world for what it was. His real father was a ghost with empty pockets. His mother's silence couldn't shield him anymore. And the only man who had ever truly stood for him was the one he had spit on. But I didn't soften. Not yet. Words are easy when the walls close in. It's actions that matter, and I had learned long ago not to take comfort in fragile promises. The weeks that followed became a quiet battlefield. Ryan tried, in his clumsy way, to step into the role of a son who respected the man before him. He didn't mock me anymore. He didn't laugh when I spoke. He offered help. Awkwardly, haltingly. Carrying groceries, fixing things, asking questions about work as though trying to bridge a gap he had spent years widening. I let him try, but I didn't let him forget. Trust, once broken, doesn't return in a month. Takes years, and even then, it never comes back the same. His mother noticed the shift. She said nothing outright, but I caught the way her eyes lingered on him, the way she watched our exchanges with a strange mix of relief and guilt. She had been complicit in his contempt, and now she saw what it had cost. Sometimes, in the silence of the evenings, I wondered if she realized she had nearly lost us both. But the most telling moment came weeks later, when Ryan introduced me to his girlfriend's parents. We sat in their living room, polite conversation filling the air, when he gestured toward me and said simply, "This is my dad, Michael. Not stepdad. Not Michael. Dad." The word struck like a blow, not painful, but heavy with the weight of all the years behind it. I didn't react outwardly. I didn't let the moment show on my face. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was acknowledgement, the thing I had been denied for so long. Later that night, I thought about it. I thought about the theft, the laugh, the police, the broken silence, the apology that had come too late but still come. I thought about Mark, drowning in bills he couldn't pay, finally forced to look his son in the eye and realize he had failed. And I thought about myself, standing at the edge of it all, finally drawing the line that had saved me from being bled dry. It hit me then. Sometimes the best way to raise someone isn't to carry them endlessly, but to let them crash headfirst into the weight of their own mistakes. To let them feel the collapse, the consequences, the cold truth of a world that doesn't forgive arrogance. Ryan had crashed, hard. But in the wreckage, he had finally looked at me and seen not a wallet, not a joke, not a man to be dismissed, but a father. Still, I knew better than to let the story end with a smile. Respect, once lost, is a fragile thing. It grows slowly, like weeds through cracks in the pavement, fragile, breakable. But it was there, and for the first time in years I could breathe. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet, I asked myself the question that still lingers even now. Was I wrong? Was I cruel for cutting him off, for calling the police, for making him face consequences that most fathers would have hidden away? Or was this the only path left, the only way to make him see the truth? Tell me, would you have endured it longer? Would you have kept paying, kept carrying, kept bleeding, all in the name of love that was never returned? Or would you have done what I did, drawn the line, watched the crash, and waited for the boy to crawl from the wreckage with new eyes? Because I've learned something in all of this. Love without respect isn't love at all. The servitude, and I will never live as a servant again.